Unfortunately, in our history of dealing with environmental issues, we tend to look at them one at a time. And we do something to solve that problem, and by doing that, we've made something else worse. This project that Dr. Simonovich and several of my colleagues are part of is called Coastal Cities at Risk Due to Climate Change. And our cities are Vancouver, Manila, Bangkok, and Lagos. And saying, okay, what's going to happen in the next 30, 40, 50 years, 60 years to those cities as the climate changes? We've got a top-flight medical doctor professor looking at the health aspects, top-flight economist professor, and teams of scientists working together to try and build a way of figuring out how to optimize, how do you make it so that the strategies you take actually have the best social benefits, the best health benefits, and you don't leave something out.
Our research is applied research. We are more on the side of developing different adaptation options and developing tools and helping those who are making decisions. And obviously now our results are being taken by the consultants to further develop the technical solutions, investigate various adaptation options, and use our methodology for the assessment of climate change impact risk to compare these different alternatives and possibly advise the city what will be the best way to deal with the potential risks from flooding. The second important aspect that I think every country should be thinking of is giving space to rivers. In Europe, this is one of the really main directions of thinking. The traditional way of living very close to the river, building some structural protections or barriers between the river and the population will not be working in the future. If we are using land for living very close to river and this land is becoming flooded very often, obviously rebuilding at the same location or rebuilding with the same type of technology or rebuilding at the same elevation does not make much sense.
Now they're taking action in Bangladesh. They're taking action to warn the people that when they build a school, they now build the bottom floor doesn't have anything in it. So when the flood comes over water, all it does is wash it out.
I think we've made very good progress on the Millennium Development Goals that correspond to water, but there's still a lot of progress that needs to be made. We're not at all in a sustainable state. In the parts of the world that went through the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s, early 1900s, we have very substantial amounts of industrial chemical pollution, carcinogenic, highly hazardous compounds, chemicals that have been released and are contaminating our groundwater and making them unfit for consumption. These chemicals can lead to cancer and leukemia and all sorts of neurological disorders. These factories would be located right on the rivers and lake edges that would be in the center of town, and these sites are largely abandoned. So we have a big opportunity to clean those up and contribute to urban sustainability. The more we put into landfills, particularly hazardous materials, they almost inevitably leak into groundwater. So for example, we're making a lot of new products out of nanoparticles, nanocarbon, and all sorts of nanofibers are being used in new products, and we're putting those into landfills every day. We don't know the potential harm that could lead to down the road. I would say in the countryside, where there's a lot of farming going on, we have very different problems. We have a lot of nutrients, pesticides and organics that are contaminating the lakes and rivers and groundwater. And so there's a lot of research going on here on how much of those pollutants are getting into the groundwater in lakes and rivers, and how we can possibly reduce algal blooms, fish kills, deoxygenated zones. In the less developed regions of the world, where there's a lot of poor sanitation and hygiene practice, where they don't have the infrastructure that we do for sewage and wastewater treatment plants. And so there we're doing research really trying to help reduce infant mortality by improving sanitation in the developing world. At most contaminated sites, for some of the most toxic pollutants, we really have no good solutions. So what ends up happening is they come along with a digger and they dig up the soil. And it really isn't treated. It doesn't really solve the problem, it just moves it somewhere else. And sometimes you might have to dig up, hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of soil, when in fact only a small fraction of that is actually contaminated. And so we're really looking at developing some innovative solutions. We have new technologies that have the ability to use very little energy, that we can use the properties of the contaminants themselves to destroy themselves in the subsurface. We can take advantage of bacteria, stimulate the growth of those naturally occurring bacteria, and have them consume the contaminants. And we can also look at things like injecting steam into the ground and other fairly innocuous materials that can interact with contaminants and help degrade them, and therefore restoring the natural functioning of the subsurface environment. We know that for every dollar you spend on investment in remediation, you get a $4 return on your investment in terms of boost to the local economy through environmental benefit, social benefit, and economic benefit. So it pays to be green, really, when it comes to remediation. We have a lot of field trials where we do a lot of field practice. We have a lot of computer models where we can simulate these systems. And we have a lot of new technologies like nanoparticles and using thermal techniques and using solar panels. And we can integrate all of these technologies together into really innovative and some high-tech and even some low-tech solutions that can really make a difference in people's lives and really contribute to environmental sustainability.
It's one thing to believe in something, but it's another thing to actually do something about it. So what do you think makes people want to actually go through with the change and actually make an impact, as opposed to just knowing about it and learning about it?
One of the key issues that caused the problem in the first place is that we didn't think in systems. So the question is really, how do we work together, right? How do we create networks? How do we collaborate?
One of the things we have to consider at all times is just how interdisciplinary and at how many scales adaptation has to work. So the problems we're facing are bigger than any one person, any one discipline, but if we're going to have any chance of adapting to climate change, we need not just the full range of academic disciplines, but also the full range of stakeholders from civil society to governments on board.
To some, the problem appears overwhelming and the obstacles appear insurmountable. And I think that we as a human species, as a humankind, we need to be more hopeful and to trust our ability to deal with the problem.
As environmentalists, we tend to want to communicate the seriousness of the issue to the wider population, and that's important, but we also need to figure out a way to empower them so that they'll be able to act on an individual level.
Right? Like how can we ensure that it leads to action rather than apathy?
And when we're looking at how we're framing the messages, we need to look at who our target audience is and what is going to motivate them into action. It might be financial motivation, and that's okay, or it might be more of an environmental motivation or motivation related to their family or health, and we need to figure out what that motivation is and reduce the barriers that would prevent them from being more environmentally responsible.
The Singapore Environmental Council has released a position paper to recommend a nationwide program to reduce plastic bag usage. Known as Bring Your Own Bag Every Day, the initiative includes a mandatory weekend charge of 10 cents per plastic bag in order to encourage customers to bring their own reusable bags.
What are the 3 key things that climate change activists can keep in mind when developing future campaigns?
So I think the first thing is know your audience. You really need to know who you're talking to, and more importantly, what motivates them and what their barriers are. Try to frame the message in a way that's going to empower the individual to take action. Don't just give people a problem to think about, you need to give them a solution. Something that's tangible, something that's measurable, that's something that they can tackle as an individual and feel like they are making a difference.
We need to adapt to climate change by taking actions to reduce the impacts, and where there are, gain the benefits.
If I'm in a boat that's sinking, I'm going to start bailing, even though not everyone is bailing out water. I'll start bailing, and I think we have to start doing that.